Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are doing well. This is a response discussion related to some of the historic names that have been attached to the indigenous people of the Americas. And we're going to be focusing this time on mainland America, specifically North America, and what would be considered now the area known as the U.S. We're going to look at this merchant's map of commerce to get an idea of the ancient understanding of the waters that bordered the Americas. And what we're going to see is there has been a dynamic of changing the names of these bodies of water, just like we see taking place today in current times. And so previously we had a Gulf of Mexico that has now been altered to have the name the Gulf of America. And so we see a similar dynamic going on here with respect to the oceans that are attached to America. And so what we see here is this merchant's map of commerce that these entities were using to figure out trade routes and the exchange dynamics and the resources that could be exported and imported. And it goes on to indicate that there is information inside of the text related to weights and measurements and all sorts of dynamics related to trafficking. And there is a high focus on what is known as the famous City of London. Now, America is also included in here, and there is a notation that according to the ancients, there was no awareness of this place known as America. And so previously, entities believed that there were these three parts. And upon discovering America, they discovered the fourth part. Now, this is important for a number of reasons, and we will go into that. We're just going to quickly look at this naming of these bodies of water, focusing on one body of water specifically. And this book was written by Louis Robert, who is identified as a merchant. These people were truly full of themselves. And so this book was to provide these princes and these royal entities information about trade. And it was also to facilitate the trade of these various merchants around the world related to the habitable parts of the world. And we see here that it is printed in London. Now, they've done us a great service by identifying the boundaries of the various places. And so with respect to these continents, you see these boundaries spelled out. And so it indicates here that America is bounded on the north with the North Ocean Sea, and on the south with the Magellan Sea. And on the east, the Atlantic Sea. And then specifically on the west, the West Indian Ocean. And so on that side that we understand as California right now, that was previously identified as the West Indian Ocean. This is, of course, in contrast to what's on the east side of the Americas, that is known as the West Indies. And so what this is suggesting is that mainland America was understood as India in one shape, form, or fashion, because the North American area was also included in this idea of the West Indies. It goes on to indicate that there is also a border related to the Straits of Anion. Okay. And then it gives all of the longitudes and latitudes. And here you can see it a little bit more clearly. We're going to zoom in on it a little bit more so that you can see it isolated. Now, there apparently has been some playing around with the maps because there was a map that showed the Indian Ocean on the west side of America in the northern portion with the Pacific Ocean at the bottom. And so what it looks like is that what used to be the West Indian Ocean is now called the Pacific Ocean. And so it was originally, or at least at some point in time, in the South, in terms of like South America. It now is the name for the entire body of water that is over on that side, including mainland North America. And so you have South America and North America both having this dynamic going on. Now, of course, you see another change here because the South was identified as the Magellanic Sea. Okay. And so it went from that to the Pacific Ocean. And of course, you know, this is named after Magellan. And so who knows what it was originally named? This is what we have, however. And so, of course, it stands to reason that the people in mainland America would be thought of as Indians, along with the country that we now know as India, given the fact that the water that was bordering America was understood as the West Indian Ocean. Now, in some depictions, of course, it just leaves out the Indian part and just has the West Ocean. But of course, that's not what we've been referring to it as. We've been referring to it as the Pacific Ocean. But with respect to this West Indian designation, it indicates then that the people would be referred to as West Indian. This is in addition to the people on the eastern side of America that are also referred to as West Indian. And so there's a lot of West Indian going on with these particular dynamics and based upon this map dynamic that we've got going on here related to commerce. This also brings up the question about the transatlantic slave trade. If you recall, in the transatlantic slave trade, there were often instances wherein people were being enslaved from these unspecified West Indian islands or these Indian Ocean islands. And so it's very confusing when we consider it that way. We might not clearly understand where these people were coming from because they were playing games with all of these names. And so it's possible that when referring to enslaving people from the Indian Ocean islands, that these people might have been enslaving people from the Indian Ocean islands that would be west of mainland America, because that whole ocean, according to this narrative, was understood as the West Indian Ocean. And so again, it presents quite a bit of confusion about where all of these various people were coming from, where they were going to, and why these persistent name changes. You even see this dynamic going on right now, and it's probably very fortunate that we get to see this in action. We get to see this game playing with these geographic names. And so we went from the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. It's still the Gulf of Mexico. We went from that to the Gulf of America. And so when you're looking at the history, it's as if the Gulf of Mexico doesn't exist anymore. And so when you're looking at things again, like the transatlantic slave trade, that involved the Gulf states, it involved the Gulf region, specifically the Gulf of Mexico. And so now when you consider it, it appears that wherever they were going to or being transplanted to, that place doesn't exist anymore. And so again, this is just more chaos and confusion. And we really don't know the original names for any of these places at this point. I will say the general public, we don't generally know. But what we do know is that there has been significant game playing with respect to these names and playing around with people's identities, giving people all of these various identities over time so that people don't really know who they are or where they came from. And here we have this very odd dynamic going on with this map. This is another map of commerce coming out of Windsor. And this is again the merchant's map of commerce. Now, this one actually does have a label for the ocean that is on the west side of America. And this particular depiction just indicates that the ocean is known as the West Ocean. However, it was the West Indian Ocean. But this is what we have for here. And also at the bottom is the Pacific Ocean, and that would be below the North American area, moving into the South American area. Another odd notation that has come up a couple of times is this Tamarica. Now, it's very difficult to find a lot of this now, but it was popping up all over the place. And it wasn't just coming up as Tamerica, Tamerica, but it was also coming up with this lowercase t and then America, the way you regularly spell America. And you can see this notation related to this dynamic here. Now back to this merchant's map of commerce. What was also noted previously was that there was a Tamarica mentioned in this text. However, the notation of Tamarica in this text doesn't seem to be present anymore. It's unclear about whether or not this is a different edition, perhaps, and so therefore it's showing something different. But there was a Tamarica before, and you see that there's an indication that there's something that looks like Tamarica that was in the text, but it is not found in the text when looking for Tamarica now. Also, what is noted is there was a map, and perhaps it's somewhere floating around, that showed the Indian Ocean on the west side of America. And so if you have that map, perhaps you can share it, but it was floating around somewhere. And also noted is this interesting depiction here at the beginning of the book. And where have we seen this before?